Good morning. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to present. And my talk is called "Creating a Published Space for Georeferencing Sanborn Maps." Okay, a little bit about me first. Some of this was in the bio, I guess. I graduated originally from southwestern Wisconsin and lived now in Louisiana for a while. Got a BA in 2011 in anthropology, and worked for the National Park Service doing GIS work, and eventually kind of moved into freelancing and a lot of web programming and using open source software. Since 2019, I've been a student at Louisiana State University, pursuing a dual degree program in geography and also library information science. So when I was trying to plan what to do in a thesis project for myself, I wanted to include a lot of things that I've worked on in the past and really enjoyed. One, georeferencing old maps. You'll see, pretty central to this. Became very involved in open source software and knew that I wanted to focus on using that and maybe writing some. I always have liked about GIS that it is a perfect way to give more public access to public material. And finally, a big fan of infrastructure. You'll see, I think all these things are kind of somewhat combined into this project. So today I'm going to give first a little overview of the maps that I'm using for this project, the collection, and then talk about the software, and then show a little bit of the combination of the two. So the Sanborn fire insurance maps, I think many are familiar with this map series. From the late 1800s to the early 1970s, I believe, this company created fire insurance maps all across the United States. Here's an example of New Orleans in 1885. Each little color block is a different sheet, and I've highlighted sheet 20. If we flip to that page in the volume, you see the amount of detail that's here, a lot of railroads. This is right on the Mississippi River. And then if we zoom in even further, you can just get an idea of how much is jammed into this. You may say, well, New Orleans is a big city. Of course, there's good maps of it, but this is my hometown of 4,500 people in Wisconsin, and they also made a bunch of editions of this town too. So it's a very ubiquitous endeavor. So the Library of Congress has a massive online collection of these that they've digitized, and there are 35,000 volumes in this collection online. Right now, you can go find them, and they're free to access, and they contain almost 500,000 sheets. And then they cover 8,800 different communities around the US. One wonderful thing about this collection is that they did research during the digitization process and made sure that all of them are outside of copyright at this point, the ones that they scanned. And they created two different really great APIs, or application programming interfaces, to interact with this collection programmatically. One JSON one, and then they also have a IIIF server. So the question, of course, for me at this point was like, what is a great new thing to do with this, with these maps? Which will introduce this concept of georeferencing. Many, I'm sure, know this already here, but just as a little visual illustration. So we go from, on the left, a scan of the map, and then by creating these ground control points, which are marked with black X's, you can register this in what is on the right, a web map, but you're essentially assigning spatial coordinates to this original scan. So that's this process, and very basically, you're turning a scanned map file into an actual geospatial layer. This is not a new idea to georeference Sanborn maps. This is a very small collection of articles and research papers, things people have used them for in the past, and probably one of their biggest uses nowadays, and since the 50s really, is for looking back at old industrial waste areas and environmental assessment. So just to say, and also many cities around the world or around the US have georeferenced their local Sanborn maps. So you may find them in Milwaukee, New York City Public Library, Boston, San Luis Obispo. So a lot of people have worked with this collection. The georeferencing process itself can be pretty tedious and certainly time consuming. And for very small organizations, it might be something they don't have any technical resources for. But also for these massive collections, it's just too much to do. And I'm sure people are thinking, what about automating the process? That's certainly been done for certain map series like the USGS topos. Some of these historical series are still a little too irregular to automate that. I'm sure people are working on it, but usually people use crowdsourcing efforts of some sort. So this is a little overview of what that looks like, a crowdsourcing georeferencing project. So up on the left, we start with these digital collections. And then typically there's some sort of georeferencing web platform that's either implemented alongside the collection or on top of it. The details, differ from situation to situation, but essentially the scanned documents are then ingested or sort of brought into this platform somehow, and then the crowds are able to perform this georeferencing task within the browser in the georeferencing platform. The result then is geospatial layers, like I mentioned before, and so technically speaking, maybe geotiffs or just web services of some sort, and then these can be reused in many different mapping clients, etc., like desktop software, web maps, like using OpenLayers, Leaflet, or Mapbox, etc. And they're used for many different applications like research, spatial analysis, etc. So I also really like this idea of building a community around maps, historical maps, and so I thought the idea of people engaging with the georeferencing process, maybe of the maps of their hometown, would be a valuable thing to kind of facilitate. And it gets a little bit into this idea of the participatory archives and archival commons, quote unquote. And I won't say too much more about this, but I did really like this. It's a book chapter by Alexandra Evely, and she talks about crowdsourcing and in efforts and kind of different ways to frame those projects. So now I'll move a little more onto the software itself. The most common one of these platforms is called Georeferencer, and maybe not most common, but one of the most common. And it's managed by a company called Cloaken Tech, and you may have encountered it in the David Rumsey online collection. It's kind of behind the scenes there. And it's implemented in other institutions as well. But here's their kind of front page of their platform. Another one that's very common is called MapWarper by Tim Waters. It's open source, which means it's implemented independently by institutions. And for example, here, the New York Public Library on the left. A more recent one that I found is the Public Record Office, Victoria in Australia. And a really recent one that's still in development, but doing really, really cool things, allmaps.org, a developer in the Netherlands named Bert Spahn. And so he's really focusing more on using IIIF servers, like the Library of Congress actually does provide, and many collections provide that. So when I was considering these ones, I was kind of seeing some different drawbacks in terms of what I wanted to work with. For one, Georeferencer, proprietary software, and so that was kind of a non-starter for me for this project. And then MapWarper uses a lot of very out-of-date technology, so it's been discontinued at a couple of places because of that, and I didn't want to pursue that too much further. All Maps, again, like I said, is kind of different model and also still in development, but I did correspond with Bert quite a bit. So why not try a new approach? I knew that I wanted to prioritize open source software, and I really liked this idea of building on top of a existing content management system. Another one that I hadn't mentioned yet is called the Virtualis Kartenforum out of Dresden, Germany library, and they had built theirs. It's kind of out of date now, but they built it on top of an existing content management system. So this could bring with a developer or service provider base potentially, and then potentially can connect with the existing user base as well. And less work. Don't really know what that means at this point, but it's different work. So this brought me to this system called GeoNode. which is much more popular in Europe than in the US. You may not have heard of it, but it's an open source geospatial content management system. And it's akin to ArcGIS Online, different in some ways, but that's kind of gives you the idea of it. So it's kind of GeoPortal, GeoData Hub system. So for example, here is from their gallery, an implementation of GeoNode for the Alpine Convention Atlas. I don't know much about this, but here's the front page branded, as you can see, and then as you would expect of a content management system, you have layer lists, which could be vector layers, and you can edit those, and then, or raster layers. And then they also had this resource for documents, which was very attractive to me in planning or conceiving of this idea. So now I'll give a little description of what it looks like to combine the two. Going back to this slide from before, but kind of augmenting it, in this case, the Library of Congress Sanborn Map Collection is up there on the left, and then the documents are coming in, and so what we have is GeoNode as this georeferencing platform, and they come in as documents in the content management system, and then the crowds would use this extension is what I've built that kind of fits in the middle to turn the documents into layers in the system. And one thing that I was not really counting on, but is some great extra bonus, is that like ArcGIS Online, GeoNode, you can author maps from the content in the system. So you could create collages of these maps. And then they also recently added this maps, or geostories, like story maps. So you could create these new kind of thematic articles or blog posts from the content in there. But of course, the layers are available then through external mapping or to use in external clients. Okay, so it is really quick demo time. I'm just going to click through a little to show you kind of how things are looking and what where this is going. So some of this is boilerplate GeoNode stuff, but the front of here is new. As you can see, I've added some different text, and then this is a little bit of a wrapper around the API to the Library of Congress. So the idea is that people then would be able to search for a community. I have prepared Alexandria as an example here, and then these are the volumes. So if we go to view this, then you kind of get into GeoNode default views, essentially. So these have been loaded in. First thing to mention is I've added these keywords that allow you to kind of look at the different statuses of the process for certain documents. In this case, I've already georeferenced 2 of them. I have prepared one, and then another is unprepared. So what is this prepared and unprepared? I need to mention this because it's kind of a quirk, but also very common in map series like this. So if I have this one here, let's prepare document. So essentially, this is splitting the document into separate pieces because the georeferencing process really needs to have an individual file or an individual extent to map the coordinates against. So within here, you can build, you can click through and then cut this as many times as you need to make individual pieces. So I won't run this process, but that would run in the background and then kind of create 4 new documents. And then you would be able to georeference. If it's a single sheet, then you could just mark it. So that's a pretty important step that hopefully people won't get wrong. We'll figure that one out later. So I've already georeferenced a couple of these, but we can edit one and just to see the interface a little bit, what it looks like. It's probably not too special really because this looks like probably all georeferencing interfaces. The preview here will update if you add more points, so it's kind of a point and click process. Can't see this very well, so. And then I did add this other transformation process, which can give super distortion, which you don't really need for Sanborn maps, but for certain maps, georeferencing, you might need to mush them around. So again, then you would be submitting these control points, and then that would kind of run in the process. And in the end, create a layer. So these layers, I've been working, this is kind of in process, to have an interface for trimming the edges of the layers. Hopefully this will load up correctly, but if not, I will abandon this section. And so to collage these together properly, I decided to take this approach where the file isn't changed at all, but kind of a mask is sent to GeoServer for the style. And then the style will be updated to clip the rasters, so you can make kind of iteratively go back and forth to change this as you need. That's still under construction. And then once you have one or more layers, this is, again, basic GeoNode stuff. Here you can select one or more. You could search keywords, et cetera, to find them, and then create a map from them. So a map of Alexandria, 1892, for example. I wanted to show a tiny bit of the database side of things, just to illustrate a little bit about how I'm trying to design the workflow. So you have ground control points get stored individually in the database, and then they're grouped, and a group is assigned to a document. And that exists and is created the first time someone georeferences something, but then I wanted to also track later additions if someone goes in and edits. So then I kind of use this paradigm of sessions, so that you create a new session every time you go and edit or do a georeferencing process. So this is kind of all about creating statistics, I guess, and kind of tracking usage, or at least making that possible. And then eventually that kind of information can be pushed back to the front end, so you see like, oh, 3 different people have touched this map. And I should have done this earlier when I was here, but one of the things that I liked about GeoNode right away is all of these are just items in the database, and so they come along with they kind of have these extra little features like ratings or comments or favorite, et cetera. So you can kind of interact with these a little more sharing. Great, so perfect. Really, just one more slide, I guess. So the test drive for this, I'm hoping to do kind of starting in December. Still have some work to do on it, but the idea is to send out announcements, invitations to groups around Louisiana, and then allow import of kind of some sort of limitation on what can be imported into the system of Louisiana Sanborn Maps, and then kind of see what happens. And I won't run it forever, of course, but the geography department at LSU maintains this Atlas geo portal where they have some historical imagery, LiDAR, et cetera. So Luke just said it'd be great to move these final products, if whatever ends up being kind of a full mosaic, into that program or into that system. Wonderful. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. You can find me these ways. And welcome questions if we have time. And I'll get on Slack after this too and see if there's any questions there. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, great. I'll repeat for online, but the question is what georeferencing algorithm is used. So all of the backend stuff works with GDAL, which is probably not a surprise. It runs everything almost. And the algorithms that are used, specifically either the polynomial first transformation, or like I showed, you can switch to the thin plate spline one, which has a completely different approach. I tried higher order polynomials thinking, oh, this will be easy, and then it wasn't. Something crazy happened. So sticking with number one for now, and the Sanborn maps are pretty straightforward. So it's not, yeah, I think that's good enough for now. Yeah. Yeah.
For projects like this, I wondered about people who are working on projects on their own platform. Is there a way to import georeferenced stuff? If I'm georeferencing stuff in future, I have one document, so it could be these, but then I have to go back to the full process. Here's 20 of them.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So again, repeat for online, but he asked whether if someone has been doing this process on their own in QGIS, for example, can those be imported into the system? Yes, in that GeoNode can ingest all sorts of spatial data. So you wouldn't be ingesting it at this point. It's a good idea, but you wouldn't be ingesting it in you wouldn't have those control points in the back end. You wouldn't have necessarily all that, but you could upload it just as a TIFF, a GeoTIFF. I like that idea. And I like also the idea of people being able to download these individually from here. It's not to be like, this is the end all location, but kind of, just an idea of supporting new efforts, I guess. Yeah, question.
Deliberately show the quality of the points.
Yeah, good question. So he asked if I had deliberately chosen not to show the quality of the points in terms of differential or error, like MapOrbit does, or in QGIS. Certainly something that I felt could be added easily when I get the time. In this case, I felt also that type of calculation is probably not super important. If you're looking at these maps, you're saying, my house is here, and this building used to be here, So in this case, I was thinking getting down to the real nitty-gritty of the specific control points, it was just not the highest priority, but certainly something to add in. Yeah.
And GeoNode is something that you need to run on your own local server, right?
Yes. The question was, GeoNode is something you have to maintain and run on your own server, and 100% correct, and it's hefty. It's been a lot to work with, and I decided to go all in just to see how it went, and it's been challenging. It's a lot of components. GeoServer, for example, is behind it. There's a lot of things working together to make that platform work. So it's definitely a bit of a challenge. Yeah.